Have you ever trusted someone so much that you didn't even consider they might be betrayed? Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you raised with love, believing they would do the same for you, and discovered that behind a smile there was a cold plan to end your life? That's exactly what happened to me. After decades of dedication, after giving up my dreams to give everything to my children, I realized that one of them didn't see me as a mother, but merely an obstacle to achieving what he wanted, and he was willing to cross all boundaries. I always thought old age would bring peace, that after so much work, so much struggle, rest would come. But the truth is, sometimes it's at this stage that we discover the worst sides of the people we raised. Ingratitude doesn't warn us when it arrives. It settles silently, often in those we least expect. When I discovered the diabolical plan to poison me, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, not only because of the poison in the coffee, but because of the poison that lived in the heart of the one I called my son. It was like dying in life, but I knew in that moment that I would not be a silent victim. And perhaps you can relate to this feeling of abandonment, of being seen as vulnerable just because you're getting older. Perhaps you felt that someone close to you took advantage of your trust to belittle you. I want to tell you every detail of this story, not to fuel the pain, but to show that it's possible to turn things around. Today, I'll show you how a cruel plan was unmasked, how a woman considered fragile used her own intelligence to save herself and even turn pain into victory. This story isn't just mine. It's about all the people who were underestimated but chose to resist. So, if you've ever trusted someone who let you down, if you've ever been called weak, confused, or incapable, stick with me until the end. What you'll hear here could change the way you see yourself and the people around you. I returned home earlier than anyone expected. The trip to Canada had been beautiful, but too cold for my weary bones. I just wanted the warmth of my home, my little corner of peace. But what awaited me behind that door wasn't welcome. It was the beginning of a family betrayal I never imagined. When the taxi dropped me off at the curb, I noticed something strange. The kitchen lights were still on, even though it was late at night. Jason, my stepson, whom I raised as my own son, never stayed home on a Friday. He always preferred bars, parties, and a life free of responsibilities. At that moment, I felt a chill I couldn't explain. I entered quietly, without making a sound with my suitcase. I didn't want to disturb him. After all, Megan, his wife, had been so generous in taking care of the house. But deep down, something told me that this generosity hid something else. It was then that I heard voices coming from the kitchen, whispering something that made me stop in the middle of the hallway. "We'll start tomorrow morning. Symptoms should appear within a week," Megan said, her tone cool, almost casual. My heart raced, my legs trembled. I didn't understand. Symptoms? Symptoms of what? I stood still, holding my breath to avoid discovery. It was as if I were suddenly a stranger in my own home. The answer came like a knife when I heard Jason, his voice thick with nervousness, ask, "What if she resists?" Megan laughed, a cold laugh, and replied, "She won't. She'll be confused, forgetful, and then we'll get full guardianship." At that moment I realized they were talking about me. They were trying to poison me into declaring me incompetent. I felt the ground disappear from under my feet. Decades dedicated to that boy, ever since he was a frightened child, and now he was plotting to take everything I'd built. It was more than greed for inheritance. It was ingratitude. It was the destruction of any bond we once called family. But I couldn't give in to despair. There, standing in the dark, I choked back tears. If they thought old age made me fragile, they were about to discover otherwise. I knew I needed to proceed with caution. From that moment on, my life became a game of silence, patience, and strategy. And that was just the first step toward an even greater plan. Before everything fell apart, I was proud of the life I'd built. When I married Richard over 30 years ago, we were both just dreamers with the courage to start from scratch. He brought Jason, a 3-year-old boy abandoned by his mother, and I brought David, my 7-year-old son, so loving and responsible. Together, we became a family. It was alongside Richard that I built Morrison Construction, a company that started small, renovating simple houses, and grew into a $50 million empire. Every brick of that story was made with sweat, sacrifice, and love. And even after Richard passed, I kept the company alive, not out of ambition, but to honor all we'd been through together. I always imagined that when the time came, I would sell the company and divide everything equally. David would get his share, Jason his, and I would keep what was left to live out my final years in peace. It was only fair. It was what I believed would bring the family together. But, as I discovered too late, not everyone sees it that way. Jason was always different from David. While my biological son worked and built a solid career, Jason grew up living a life of excess, always waiting for someone to solve his problems. I loved him like a son, but deep down, I could see the emptiness in his eyes, a silent ambition that never ended. After Richard died, I noticed Jason starting to get closer. I thought it was affection, concern, but now I see it was just calculation. He knew I'd sell the company at some point. He knew a fortune was at stake. And for someone who never really wanted to work, inheritance was the easiest shortcut. Megan, his wife, was the perfect complement to this ambition. Elegant, polite, but with a look that hid something cold. I welcomed her into the family as I did Jason, thinking she would bring balance, that perhaps he would finally become a better man. But I was wrong. She was complicit in every plan. Recalling all this, a mixture of anger and sadness consumed me. I wasn't just dealing with greed for inheritance. I was facing the definitive breaking of a bond I believed to be eternal. And this pain, however profound, couldn't paralyze me. I needed to find the strength to face what was to come. The morning after I returned, Megan appeared with a sweet smile and a glass of warm milk with cinnamon. She told me it was to help me relax after the trip. It seemed like a sweet gesture, but after the conversation I'd overheard, every detail had me on edge. I accepted, lifted the glass to my lips, but didn't swallow. I only let a little touch my mouth, and felt a strange, chemical, bitter taste. My heart raced. It was real. They were trying to poison me. In that moment, I understood that every care, every pampering, was just a trap. I put the glass aside and smiled, feigning gratitude. "Thank you, dear. I'll have it later," I said, controlling the fear that threatened to betray me. The next day, it was coffee. The aroma was the same as always, strong and comforting, but after the first sip, a slight numbness took over my mind. Words slowed, ideas became jumbled. I knew I had to resist, but I also realized I couldn't pretend I was too lucid. I had to play along. I started pretending to be confused. I'd intentionally misspell dates, call Megan by her neighbor's name, ask for help using the remote control as if I'd forgotten it. All the while, I observed every detail, every look they exchanged. They believed the plan was working, and that was my only advantage. Jason, with an air of false concern, asked if I was okay. He touched my shoulder and called me Mom, a title he only used when he wanted something. Megan, always ready, said things like, "It's normal to feel this way as you get older," trying to make me believe the problem was me. But I wasn't going to give in to that theatrics. The poison's effect was treacherous. I needed to remain lucid enough not to sign anything, to avoid falling into traps. So I began taking small measures. I threw away the drinks they offered me, pretended to sleep more than I actually did, and mentally noted their every move. I was vulnerable, yes, but not defenseless. That was just the first phase of a silent war. A war where every move could decide the winner. I knew that if I wanted to survive, I would have to be more strategic than ever. And with each day, the risk increased. 2 days later, I could tell Jason and Megan were ready for the next step. That morning, Megan had entered the room with a look of false concern. "Helen, we thought it would be a good idea for a doctor to come and see you. Just to make sure everything's okay," she said, her tone almost a thinly veiled warning. I knew it wasn't care, it was strategy. A few hours later, the doorbell rang. A man in a wrinkled suit and a restless look entered, introducing himself as Dr. Patel. I remembered hearing Richard talk about him, a doctor who had lost his license for falsifying documents. My heart sank. Now it was clear they wanted more than just to confuse me. They wanted to declare me incompetent. He started with simple questions, trying to catch me in contradictions. What's today's date? Who's the president? I answered everything correctly, but slowly, as if struggling. I needed to strike the perfect balance. Seem vulnerable enough not to arouse suspicion, but lucid enough not to be misled. As he took notes, Megan and Jason exchanged knowing glances. She's really messed up lately, Jason commented, as if deeply saddened. It was an award-winning performance. Dr. Patel nodded, taking note of every word, fueling the lie they wanted to make official. Then came the final blow. He pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase and said softly, "These are just documents to ensure you'll receive the best care. Just sign here." I looked at the pages and saw words like guardianship, curatorship, transfer of assets. My stomach churned. They were about to steal my entire life with a simple signature. I feigned confusion. I can't read properly right now. I'm tired, I mumbled, shaking slightly to reinforce the act. Jason took my hand, like a loving son, and said, "Mom, this is for your own good. Trust us." I looked into his eyes, and for a second saw only greed. That gave me the strength to resist. I refused. I said I wouldn't sign anything right then. The tension in the air was palpable. Megan pressed her lips together, Jason took a deep breath, and Dr. Patel simply put the papers away, as if he knew he'd return later. But I knew I'd only bought time, and now I needed to plan my counterattack. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in the armchair in my room and took a deep breath. I knew Jason and Megan wouldn't give up. They would return with more venom, more lies, and more haste. If I wanted to survive, I would need to turn the tables, and I couldn't count on anyone, at least not right now. I grabbed a small digital recorder I'd kept in my drawer since Richard passed away. He'd always said, "Helen, never underestimate the importance of evidence." Now, those words echoed in my mind like a warning. I tucked the recorder into my robe pocket. From the next day on, everything said in that house would be recorded. I also decided to call my trusted lawyer, Charles. I used the landline in the early hours of the morning when I was sure Jason and Megan were asleep. "Charles, I need you to document that I'm sane, and if something happens to me, you must know. It wasn't an accident," I whispered. On the other end, he was silent for a moment and promised to help me. I tried to reach David, my biological son. I called him, but mid-conversation, my voice sounded weak and confused, and he thought I was overreacting. "Mom, I think you're tired. You need to rest," he said, oblivious to the severity of the situation. It was like being stabbed. I was alone in that battle. Still, I didn't give up. I began to pretend to be increasingly weak. I deliberately forgot names, stumbled slowly, letting them believe the poison was working. But silently, I watched their every move. Fear consumed me. But I knew it was my weapon to make them lower their guard. I began hiding small snacks in my room to avoid eating what they offered. Each day, I found new ways to avoid the poison without arousing suspicion. Sometimes I'd discreetly pour the poisoned coffee into the living room flower vase. Other times, I'd pretend I wasn't hungry. It was a battle of patience. I knew I needed more than just footage. I needed time for David to believe me. I needed him to see beyond their act. And most of all, I needed to keep myself alive until the right moment. Because what Jason and Megan didn't know was that behind that fragile exterior lay a woman who wouldn't be destroyed so easily. The following days were a true test of endurance. Jason and Megan realized progress was slow and began to act more boldly. It wasn't just the coffee or hot milk anymore. Now they were constantly concerned about my diet, offering juices, smoothies, and even homemade desserts that I knew hid even greater doses of that silent poison. The effect was treacherous. All it took was a careless sip, and my body felt heavy, my mind clouded, and reality blurred. Sometimes I feigned weakness so they'd believe they were winning. Other times, I had to lock myself in my room to regain even the slightest lucidity and plan my next move. It was a cruel psychological game where every mistake could be fatal. Just then, Dr. Patel returned. This time, without even pretending it was a casual visit. He brought another stack of documents and in a cold tone said, "It's getting more and more confusing. You'd better sign it to ensure your safety." I looked at him, and saw a glint of impatience in Megan and Jason's eyes. They wanted to get this over with quickly. As the doctor spoke, I heard something that chilled my soul. Megan whispered to Jason, thinking I wouldn't hear. "If she doesn't sign this time, we'll have to resort to Plan B. Accidents happen to the elderly. They fall down the stairs, they take too much medication." That was like a punch. They were willing to kill me if necessary. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to explode. But I remained calm. I looked at them as if I were confused, held the pen with trembling hands, and told them I was too tired to sign right now. Jason smiled tightly, but I saw the anger in his eyes. They were losing their patience. That night, locked in my room, I realized time was running out. I needed immediate intervention, something to break their control before it was too late. That's when I decided to take the next step, recording clearer conversations with indisputable evidence and preparing a message for David that he couldn't ignore. From that moment on, I knew I was entering the most dangerous phase of the game. Megan and Jason believed I was on the verge of collapse, but in reality, they were the ones about to fall into the trap they'd set. The next morning, Megan entered the room with a practiced smile, carrying a tray of tea and toast. "You need to eat well to regain your strength," she said in that honeyed voice that no longer fooled anyone. I thanked her and, as always, placed the cup to my lips without swallowing a drop. My body cried out for rest, but my mind knew it couldn't relax. Shortly afterward, Jason appeared with Dr. Patel. "Mom, we're going to settle this today," he said in a stern tone. On the table was a new stack of papers: transfer of assets, authorization of conservatorship, unrestricted authority for him and Megan to decide everything for me. I knew that if I signed, it would be the end. But if I didn't, they could move on to the so-called Plan B. I feigned hesitation, took a deep breath, and held the pen with trembling hands. I needed more time. Then, like a divine signal, the room phone rang. Jason and Megan glanced at each other impatiently. "Answer it quickly and come back here," Megan ordered. Jason picked up the phone and listened for only a few seconds before turning pale. "It's David," he murmured, trying to remain calm. My heart raced. Maybe he'd finally grasped the gravity of this. Megan approached nervously. "What does he want?" Jason stammered. "He said he's coming here with the police." The silence that followed was heavier than any venom. In that instant, I felt relief mixed with fear. They couldn't retreat anymore, but they couldn't advance either. Megan slammed her pen down on the table in irritation. Dr. Patel began to sweat and glance at the door as if searching for an escape route. Their mask of control was slipping. Minutes later, I heard quick footsteps on the porch and the unmistakable sound of the doorbell. Jason tried to compose himself, but when the door opened, David entered, accompanied by 2 police officers. His gaze, filled with anger and disappointment, swept the entire room. I saw him, and for the first time in days, I felt I wasn't alone. David came to me, held my hand, and said firmly, "Mom, I heard your message. Now I believe you." The tears I'd held back for so long finally fell. It was the beginning of the end for Jason and Megan, the turning point that would change their entire story. As soon as David entered with the officers, the air grew thick, almost palpable. Megan took a step back, trying to maintain her composure, while Jason stammered empty explanations. "This is a misunderstanding. We're just looking out for her," he said, his voice trembling. But no one believed this charade anymore. The officers approached me cautiously. "Are you Helen Morrison?" one of them asked. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Your son reported that you're being held under threat and possibly drugged. Is that true?" It was the moment I'd been waiting for. I looked Jason and Megan in the eye before answering, "Yes, they tried to poison me to declare me incompetent and steal everything I've built." Megan let out a nervous laugh. "That's absurd. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying." But I was already prepared. With steady hands, I pulled out the small recorder I'd carried for days. "Do you want to hear what was really said in this house?" I asked. Jason paled immediately, and the desperation in his eyes was almost satisfying. I pressed play, and voices echoed through the room. It was Jason saying clearly, "If she doesn't sign, we're moving on to Plan B. Accidents happen to the elderly all the time." Megan added coldly, In a week, she'll be so confused she won't even know her own name." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of the officer's pen writing everything down. Dr. Patel tried to get up and leave discreetly, but one of the officers held him back. "You will be held accountable too," he said firmly. Jason and Megan began talking at the same time, trying to blame each other. It was pathetic to see them begging, as if there was still hope, but there was no turning back. As they were handcuffed, I felt a mixture of relief and pain. I had raised them, welcomed them, given them everything I could, and they had repaid me with venom. But in that moment, I realized my determination had been stronger than their greed. I had won without needing to equalize. David came over and hugged me tightly. "It's over, Mom. They won't hurt you anymore." I took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like my home was safe again. The physical and emotional poison was being removed forever. 3 months later, I sat in the courtroom with my head held high. Jason, Megan, and Dr. Patel were there, on the other side, trying to stave off the inevitable. The room was packed with onlookers and journalists. After all, it's not every day that an elderly woman exposes such a cruel plot involving poisoning to steal an inheritance. I took a deep breath and waited for my moment to speak. When I was called to testify, I walked to the center of the courtroom with firm steps. I looked at the judge and jury and told them everything. How I listened to the conversation, how I resisted the poisons, how I recorded every word. I showed them the audio recordings that revealed the plan to declare me mentally incompetent and, if necessary, stage an accident. With each new piece of evidence, their faces grew paler. Jason's lawyer tried to claim it was concern for my health. "She got things mixed up. She was weak," he said. But the recordings were clear, indisputable. It was Jason's voice talking about selling the company, Megan laughing and suggesting dosages, Dr. Patel giving instructions to falsify medical reports. No one could deny it. When the verdict was read, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Jason was sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder and fraud. Megan received 12 years for aiding and abetting, and Dr. Patel, besides losing his license permanently, received 5 years for forgery and participating in the fraud. It was justice being served, complete and complete. After the sentencing, David held my hand and asked, "What now, Mom? What are you going to do with the company?" I smiled serenely. "It's yours now, David. It always has been for those with integrity. You will take care of it and our legacy, never letting the poison of greed destroy what we've built." He hesitated. "But I don't understand construction, Mom." I squeezed his hand and replied, "You understand honesty, and that's more than Jason ever knew. You can learn the rest, and I'll be by your side to help you." It was the beginning of a new phase, far from the betrayal that almost took everything from me. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt the sun on my face, as if for the first time in weeks. I was no longer the woman Jason had tried to poison. I was the woman who had survived, who had resisted, and who was now transforming pain into a new beginning. And that, for me, was the greatest victory. Afterward, I returned to my home. Every room felt lighter, as if the air were finally free of the physical and emotional poison Jason and Megan had brought. I walked slowly around the living room, touching old photos, memories of Richard and happy times. For the first time in months, I felt true peace. Sometimes I found myself wondering, how could someone you raised, protected, and loved turn against you? Family betrayal is a deep cut, affecting not only the body, but also the soul. But I've learned that it's not age that makes us weak. It's the naivete of believing that everyone will share our hearts. I'm no longer the same woman who returned from Canada thinking she had a close-knit family. Now I'm more attentive, more assertive, and most importantly, more aware of my own worth. If I once thought aging was synonymous with fragility, I've discovered it's actually an accumulation of wisdom that can save lives. David became my greatest support. He learned from my mistakes and choices and promised never to let history repeat itself. Seeing him take over the company with honesty gave me hope. It was proof that true goodness still existed in the family, even after so much ingratitude. Today, I know that the greatest legacy we can leave isn't just money or possessions. It's the courage to not remain silent in the face of injustice. It's the strength to resist even when everyone sees you as vulnerable. It's the determination to show that dignity has no age. When I look back, I no longer feel anger. I feel gratitude for having survived, for having had the intelligence to face manipulation and transform despair into victory. Jason tried to take everything from me, but he ended up giving me something worth more than any inheritance: the certainty that I am stronger than I imagined. Now I live each day with more ease. I travel, read, meet friends, and I never drink coffee again without remembering that sometimes the greatest dangers come from where we least expect them. But I also never forget that even in the worst situations, it's possible to emerge with your head held high. Because true freedom begins within. And you? Have you ever stopped to think about who truly deserves your trust? Sometimes the biggest blows don't come from strangers, but from those who sit at our table. But this story proves that even in the midst of betrayal, courage and dignity can be stronger than any poison. Never let anyone make you believe that old age is synonymous with weakness. Aging is about accumulating stories, wisdom, and the ability to face challenges with intelligence. If you ever feel helpless, remember, within you lies a strength that no one can take away. Now tell me, did this story remind you of someone or a situation you've experienced? Do you believe it's possible to forgive such a profound betrayal? I want to hear your opinion. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, we always share stories that move, inspire, and show that even in the worst moments, there's always a way out. And in the comments, tell me which city you're watching from. Your voice matters too.